Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you were going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money podcast from NPR.
Starting work on the final day of the legislative session, Representative Dusty Johnson says in many ways she's still very much the same person she was on day one.
Still hyper, that hasn't gone. Still love coffee.
The fast-talking Republican, who represents a number of rural counties in northeast Colorado, does concede she's feeling a little tired on this final push. And as a first-time lawmaker, she's still getting used to the title.
I respond now to Representative Johnson, but I guarantee I'll listen if you say Dusty. And it's not just because of the selective hearing, it's just I'm not used to it. The title's still weird.
When Johnson moved to an apartment on Capitol Hill back in January, it was a big change from her home on the Eastern Plains. But she said she's adjusted to the city sounds.
The adjustment, I can actually sleep at night. I think it took me 2 months.
Johnson was one of 2 first-time lawmakers we profiled earlier this session on Purplish. With roughly a third of the 65 House members being new this year, we thought it's a fun way to explore the dynamics at the State House and this job we call lawmaker.
And in the final days of the 2025 session, it felt fitting to check back in with the newbies as they wrapped up their work.
As we come to the close of these 120 days, we pause with gratitude for the work we've done together. Thank you for the strength, guidance, and perseverance you've granted each of us throughout this session of autumn.
Johnson is proud of her bills that passed, like one that lets first responders keep their voter information private, or a bill on prescription drug costs, which they were still working on right through the final day.
This bill is a powerful step in the direction to bring down drug costs for Coloradans so they don't have to choose between their prescriptions and their rent.
Plus, there are all the relationships she's built over the last few months with some of her 99 colleagues.
You know, you want to call it trauma bonding because we're all upset at bills, or you want to call it, like collective art, because we have to do things together and make it as a team. You never know which side you're going to be on with anybody because every bill changes that dynamic, especially more so for me because the urban-rural divide takes away the party side for me. It's really what's versus urban and rural. So there's so many different things that it's summer break and it's going to be weird not seeing people that we've seen for 120 days.
Democratic Representative Yara Zokai of Fort Collins, also a first-time lawmaker, agrees that relationships play a critical role at the Capitol. Her 2 biggest bills this session, an anti-price gouging measure and some legal modifications to Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act.
Both of those were really tough negotiations, and they were changed through the process, and seeing them become good policy that everyone could get behind, and, well, not everyone, but that enough people could get behind, and seeing them become law has been really exciting and a point of pride.
Zokai came in expecting to disagree with colleagues on the other side of the aisle, but she's found the intra-party debates more challenging.
Because we have the same values, we have very close friendships, and we just might not see something the same way. And when it's 1 a.m. and you didn't eat and you've been debating something for 6 hours, you might not be in your best state to have that argument with a friend.
She was also taken aback by how much pull well-funded interest groups can have at the Capitol.
It is so important to be able to get all perspectives and to make well-rounded legislation, but there also is a skewed perspective that's present in this building, and having to work around that to make sure that everyday people's voices are heard is not always easy. And it can feel really frustrating when the people who are value aligned with you don't see that.
With the session finally over, Johnson and Zokai are preparing to spend a lot more time in their districts with their families. But they're both also already thinking about what bills they want to introduce next year.
I really am looking forward to the fact that for the most part, unless something strange happens, it will be the same people coming back here. And there were a lot of us that were new this time, and we're all figuring out how this job works. When do we even go to committee? How do you make a motion? At least for me, who is not from this political world, it was very intimidating of even learning the right parliamentary procedure of how to say things and how to address people. And I don't have any anxiety about that anymore. So it'll be great to be able to jump in knowing how this job works, surrounded by people who've also been doing this already at least a year.
While state lawmakers may already be looking ahead, we in the Capitol Press Corps aren't quite done looking back to sort out what exactly they got done over the last 4 months.
From regulating artificial intelligence to changing the Labor Peace Act, gun bills, and big tech, there were a lot of major issues debated at the Colorado Capitol this year.
There was also pushback to President Donald Trump and showdowns with Governor Jared Polis.
Here's our chance to talk about it all before we finally get to crash. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capitol News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics and policy. I'm Benta Birkeland, and I'm here with Lucas Brady Woods from KUNC.
Hey, Benta.
Happy post-day of session.
To you too.
And Jesse Paul with the Colorado Sun.
What's up?
So we are back at it again for our legislative session wrap-up episode. Thank you for that, Jesse. We made it. And I should say right off the bat, we are taping this episode from the state capitol. It's a little after 9 a.m., and it is the morning after the session wrapped.
Yeah, so please forgive us if we sound a little loopy. We've had a lot of late nights lately covering the final twists and turns here at the Capitol, and everyone tends to let loose once the final gavel drops. Speaking of which, Lucas, I think you owe me some bar tab money.
Oh, shoot. I think I lost my wallet. Sorry.
Well, sine die, I mean, yes, there's always those twists and turns, but it was actually pretty humane this year. They wrapped up the night around 7:30. The sun hadn't even set. It was just very odd to have it be light and bright.
The first regular session of the 75th General Assembly is declared adjourned sine die.
And I have to say, after covering quite a few end of sessions where things really went off the rails, big bills dying, hurt feelings, major drama, I mean, just a lot could be coming down on that final day. This year ended so smoothly. I don't know if you guys noticed, but walking in the hallways of the Capitol, it was empty. There weren't even lobbyists still here.
Yeah, it was very quiet.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean the end of session was necessarily boring. There were definitely some twists and turns and a few in-your-face Polis votes.
That sounds like a great place for us to get started.
So every session has its 11th hour surprise. This giant bill, it's been worked on behind the scenes all session, suddenly arrives, days left for lawmakers to pass it.
We all knew a bill was coming to revise this first-in-the-nation AI law that the legislature passed last year. What we couldn't have predicted was what happened to that bill.
This is definitely a complex policy, and the whole backstory is kind of confusing, but the short version, Colorado's AI law places some guardrails on how companies and governments use artificial intelligence to make consequential decisions. So think a company using AI tools for its hiring process, a bank using an AI system to make loan determinations, a university using AI for admissions, weeding through applicants. Lawmakers want to ensure that people impacted by this have some knowledge and ability to push back if they think it's biased. But there were a lot of concerns about the law passed last year. From the tech industry and business community, the governor raised concerns. The plan was to come back this year and make some tweaks. So they signed a letter agreeing to that.
Right. The law actually doesn't go into effect until February 1st, 2026. So the thought was fix it this year, then it goes into effect, and everybody is happy, or at least as happy as they could be.
We were waiting for this bill all session. In the interim, there was a task force that met. People spent countless and countless amounts of time on this issue. We knew the Democratic Senate Majority Leader, Robert Rodriguez, was working on it behind the scenes, but he didn't introduce a bill until very late in session. And a lot of lawmakers and other people in the building didn't know what was in it. And like I said, this is very complex. So the time was limited to try to figure this out.
He wouldn't tell us what was in it, right? We kept asking, and he said, it's coming, I'm working on it.
And then it didn't even go anywhere. Rodriguez pulled it after its first committee hearing just 3 days before the end of session.
Right, and he told me he killed it to avoid more meddling from the tech industry. If the bill stays alive, then you can do these amendments. But the tech companies and the governor, they didn't like the changes in his bill. And Rodriguez said he thought if it was going to go forward, opponents could make changes in ways he didn't support. So he killed the bill, which a lot of people were not expecting him to do.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Rodriguez really handled this was to say, I offered these suggestions. If you don't like where they're at, then I'm just going to take the ball and go home. But as soon as the bill died, everyone in the building started freaking out that this first-in-the-nation AI law that Colorado has is going to take effect early next year with no changes. Like, we just made maybe a big mistake here.
But they ran out of time for a new bill, and the House did try sort of a Hail Mary maneuver to try to attach a delay to an unrelated bill, and that was its whole own bit of drama.
Even though the session ended pretty calmly, this was one really tense moment. The House did have to take a final vote to delay the implementation of the AI law by midnight to meet a constitutional deadline. I was sitting there on the House chamber floor. The clock is ticking closer and closer to midnight. They had the votes, so I thought, wow, are they going to pull this off? But opponents started filibustering, and they ran out the clock. So this extension failed. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of the consumer rights groups nationally and in Colorado, they feel like this has been discussed long enough. They do not want to delay when this AI law goes into effect.
Those midnight deadlines at the end of session can really make for a spicy meatball.
Well, coming out of spicy meatball, I don't quite know how to respond, Jesse, but I would say that the fact that this even happened, that it got close to midnight, I was talking to some of the AI lobbyists. They were mad at the speaker and leadership and Democrats for just even letting it, they control the calendar floor. So why did they get it to the point where you could filibuster it past midnight?
Yeah, anytime there's one of these timing issues at the Capitol, it's somebody's fault. It doesn't happen organically like it could have been avoided. But the takeaway from all of this with the AI bill is that when lawmakers come back to session next year in January, they're going to have just a month left before the AI law takes effect. Actually, less than that, really like 2 weeks. That really isn't much time to pass something this complicated. And it's a problem for tech companies because they're going to have to try to figure out whether to take steps to comply with the law as is or gamble on the legislature making tweaks.
So if AI was kind of the curveball at the end of session, let's talk now about a bill that was never a curveball, but we ended up talking about it for the entire session, Jesse, the Labor Peace Act.
Another spicy meatball. God, we talked about this back in January, February. Basically, Democrats came out of the gate this session saying they were going to repeal part of the Labor Peace Act. That's the 80-year-old law, the only one of its kind in the country that makes it harder for workplaces in Colorado to fully unionize.
And just as quickly, you had Polis saying, I am not going to sign this bill as it is. He was saying that they had to find some kind of compromise with the business community for him to get on board.
Yeah, and there was a ton of negotiating on this behind the scenes through the entire session. The two sides, business and labor, were back and forth for months, really for the whole session. But in the end, they simply couldn't reach a compromise. So on the very last day of session, Democrats passed the bill as it was introduced, and now we're waiting for a veto. You know, one interesting thing I'll note on this is that Democrats in the legislature know this veto on the Labor Peace Act bill is coming. They don't really care. They want to force Polis to make a tough decision. They know he's White House curious, and they want to test him.
White House curious.
I was going to say White House curious.
Yes, TM, trademark.
The Labor Peace Act, that's not the only veto we're anticipating. Lawmakers also passed new safety policies for rideshare companies like Uber, Lyft, and that's in spite of Polis at the end of session making it clear he still had major concerns.
Yeah, one of those concerns is that Uber is actually threatening to leave the state if this becomes law, which is a big deal when you think about how many people use that company or are drivers for it.
And lawmakers did make some changes, but the companies are still opposed. And this was a tough issue for lawmakers. The bill came from Democratic Representative Jenny Wilford, and it was partially from her own experience. She says she was sexually assaulted by a Lyft driver last year. And when it came down to the final vote on Wednesday, it was clear that Wilford was making a pitch to the governor, if you will, knowing that he had these concerns.
One sexual assault is one too many, but 15,000 is a crisis. Governor, I beg you, stand with survivors, not just in words, but in law. Sign this bill. Safety can't wait, and actions speak louder than words.
It's interesting. A lot of the bills this session where Polis and Democratic lawmakers were at odds had to do with tech companies. You had this rideshare bill, the AI bill, and we talked in our last episode about that social media bill. You really see this pattern developing where lawmakers want to put more guardrails around different areas of tech, and Polis is just not on the same page. And I think this was emblematic of kind of the devolving relationship between the governor and Democrats in the legislature this year.
I think you're calling it a veto watch, right, Jesse?
Yeah, Jared Hasselpolis.
Oh gosh, I don't know. That between that White House
Weird
curious,
image.
I don't even know where to go. But I did talk to Democrat Lindsay Doherty, and she was the sponsor of the social media bill, which listened to our previous episode of Purplish, but it was almost overridden by the legislature, his veto. And I asked her, hey, why are lawmakers sending him more things that he may veto? And she said, you know, she served with Polis for 5 years in the legislature, and she thinks more members are just, they want to fight for their constituents and they want to do the laws they want to do. And there's just less concern. Like, we still have to do what we think is right. If he's going to veto it, he's going to veto it. But she didn't want to not represent her constituents out of a fear of what Polis may do. And she said she's seen a little bit of shift on that.
It sounds like they're getting a little tired of how heavy-handed he can be with the legislature.
I want to turn to a couple of bills where the dynamic was not lawmakers or Democrats versus Polis, but Democratic lawmakers versus Trump. First, Lucas, explain what ended up happening with the Democrats' big immigration bill.
It passed, right, in the final days, but there wasn't really any major suspense around that. I think the real question here is what might happen next, because this bill is designed to help keep undocumented immigrants from coming to the attention of ICE, and there's a good chance that that's going to bring some kind of backlash from the Trump administration.
Yeah, Colorado's already in their sights. Just days before lawmakers passed this bill, the Justice Department sued Colorado and Denver, claiming the laws already on the books here violate the Constitution by interfering with federal immigration enforcement.
This happens right before they're passing the bill. How much did that come up during that final debate?
It did come up. And Republicans warned that this bill will really just make things worse. And really, the possibility of a Trump retaliation has been hanging over this bill since it was introduced. But for their part, supporters of it argue the way Trump is going about immigration enforcement is the thing that's unconstitutional, and that there's nothing in the Constitution that compels the state to make ICE's job easier.
The immigration bill wasn't the only way we saw lawmakers respond to the Trump administration this year. They also had this bill that kind of separated Colorado's vaccine policies from the federal government's, and they passed new protections around abortion and for transgender people.
I spent a lot of time covering the transgender bill that aimed to expand rights and protections. It had a lot of different elements. It was a pretty complex policy as introduced. The one section that really upset conservatives, Republicans, was a provision that a judge in a custody dispute would have to consider whether a parent was affirming their child's transgender identity. And that could help determine custody decisions, parenting time. Opponents felt it really put parents at risk of losing their kids based on their religious faith or personal beliefs, and it was just the government telling them how to raise their kids.
Yeah, that was a big sticking point. But another interesting aspect here is that it wasn't just conservatives who were worried about the bill. Really prominent state and national LGBTQ groups had major concerns.
They thought it had legal vulnerabilities, and they worried it could be challenged and lost in court and set a damaging precedent. So that actually pushed sponsors to take out the custody provision and a few other things.
So I think what was passed was pretty watered down, right? I mean, I think it was a theme that we saw throughout the session, spicy meatballs becoming more tame.
I think that's right. I mean, it does a few things, puts dead naming and misgendering explicitly in anti-discrimination laws, but it is significantly watered down, and people on all sides would agree.
Okay, so those were some of the big things that lawmakers wrapped up or didn't wrap up right at the end of their work. But before we say goodbye to this session, there are also a lot of things we've covered on Purplish this season that have changed. In a moment, we'll get up to speed on those.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News
On our first Purplish episode this year, we said we didn't really expect guns to be a big issue this legislative session. Democrats had done a lot on that in recent years, and they had other things to worry about. But, mea culpa, that didn't end up being the case at all.
Yeah, way to go, Lucas.
I think I was the one who told my editor, hey, I don't think they're going to do anything like an assault weapons ban.
That's what we were told.
Yeah, they ended up having like a half dozen bills on this topic. They did stuff like raising the age to buy ammunition to 21, and they put new safety requirements on gun shows. They tried to crack down on stolen guns, but of course the real biggie was Senate Bill 3.
Senate Bill 3, totally. That started out as essentially a ban on a lot of popular semi-automatic weapons, rifles, shotguns, and some handguns based on the fact that they accept detachable ammunition magazines.
Exactly, but unlike the Labor Peace Act repeal, this is a case where the governor ended up getting his way. He pushed for a lot of changes, and he ended up getting them. The bill changed a lot as it went through the process. People will still be able to buy these guns when the law takes effect next year, but in order to do that, they'll have to undergo vetting by their county sheriff and get some extensive in-person safety training, and then they'll have to pass a test, so it's not an easy bar.
Second Amendment advocates and Colorado Republicans have not been fans of this bill. No surprise there, and it's very likely this will be challenged in court.
Right. House Republicans actually sent a letter to U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi asking her to review the constitutionality of Senate Bill 3. That's highly unusual for state lawmakers to take a step like this, directly petitioning the federal government to review a law. But I think what's interesting about it is that it will basically take the financial burden of this lawsuit off of private groups, and it'll put it on the Trump administration.
Okay, so let's switch gears to something else we talked about in a previous episode. Jesse, I know you're just dying to talk about vacancy appointment legislation. Very exciting. Where did things land on that?
Thank you, Lucas. I thought you'd never ask. Don't say spicy meatball. Don't say spicy meatball. Where it ended up was basically a special election light type of situation. You had mentioned in that episode that Tennessee has a model. Colorado is basically going to adopt that. There was also a bill that would make some changes to county commissioner vacancy appointments. Both of those passed. They're waiting the governor's signature, and for all we know, he's going to sign those.
Okay, thanks for that, Jesse. And Benta, let's move on to another important item. This session, you've been extensively covering a state backlog on processing DNA evidence collection from sexual assault cases. The backlog included more than 1,400 victims with an average wait time that got up to nearly a year and a half. What are lawmakers doing to address this issue and get this evidence processed?
Tackling it in a few different ways. They've agreed to give $3 million to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to address the backlog. So part of that is processing and outsourcing kits, and then the rest of the money's dealing with other things at CBI. With those funds comes a new requirement. The CBI has to provide regular updates on how this money's being used. Lawmakers also created an independent panel, and it will include people from nonprofits representing victims and law enforcement and all these various entities that impact the backlog. The idea there is they'll really be keeping an eye on things, reporting to the legislature. The state is trying to prevent the cases from ballooning again without anyone really noticing. So they can figure out trends and maybe ways to use technology to just really get a handle on things moving forward so we're not in this position again as a state.
Still seems like there's a lot of work to do on that.
There is.
I feel like we're not done talking about this.
So as we wrap up, I'm curious what each of you think you'll remember most about this session, or something that just stood out to you.
Well, first of all, the window out to the balcony next to the press table has been broken the entire session.
That's your takeaway.
That's one of my big takeaways. They need to get that fixed. But in all seriousness, this is my third session covering this legislature, covering any legislature. And last year and the year before were very chaotic, especially towards the end of session. And I kind of just thought that was the way things are around here. But, with how things shaped up this session, with some big issues being dealt with early on, keeping the calendar without a lot of weekend work towards the end of session. I think we had multiple weekends in a row at the end of last year's session working straight through. But this year there wasn't a lot of that. And it was a really, really different experience here. And I feel like even in the sort of the vibe and the personalities and how that came out this year, it was a lot calmer.
I heard that from people across the political spectrum. One person said they're more amicable, more friendly. And I think, yes, people weren't working as late of hours. In the House, they worked one Saturday and one Sunday, and they had three-day weekends, and that does improve people's moods, even if you're thinking it's not impacting you, just the lack of sleep, and if you're here till midnight or 1 in the morning multiple times a week, and weekends, people are just exhausted. As one member also pointed out, we have the leaders in the House who are now their third year in leadership. So he felt like people understood each other better in terms of how to manage the calendar and what those pain points are.
Seems like they were working smarter, not harder this year.
Ooh.
A session of fewer tears. That's what I'm going to call it.
And what stood out to you, Jesse?
I mean, I really agree with what Lucas had to say. This is my 8th session, and this one was pretty chill. I didn't really know what to expect coming into it, but I think one of the factors that really played into how everything rolled out was the fact that lawmakers had no money, so they couldn't really take on some of these really big policy issues that they wanted to. It was kind of the year of regulation and budget cut at the Capitol.
So, Benta, what about you? Any other takeaways?
I think, speaking to how smoothly things went, we talked about so many new members, and it just speaks to, I've been covering this institution for a while, and it really does shift a lot depending upon the new members we have and just their dynamic. And I was pleasantly surprised it was as smooth as it was, given what's happening nationally, given that we came under just as Trump is being sworn into office and Democrats were so upset and Republicans were emboldened. And I thought, oh, wow, is this going to be a tough session? And it wasn't intrapersonally tough in the way it has been in previous years.
I would have to agree.
We are going to go out on this episode on a haiku note. Thank you to Jesse. You gave us some homework as we're preparing for this episode. You said, hey, let's all write a haiku about the 2025 legislative session.
Really a great topic for some poetry.
I just love me some haikus, Hakuna Matata.
If that's how you feel, Jesse, I think you should go first.
I will happily go first. I actually wrote 2 because
there's
one
an
about...
overachiever, right?
I am an overachiever. One's about the Capitol and one's
overachiever.
about you guys. Okay, here's the Capitol one. Sad, Jared Polis. Goodbye to Frank the Sergeant. Special session soon? Okay, and then about you guys.
Uh-oh.
Lucas sweats a lot. Brian the Calculator. Benta reins us in.
Well, I sadly had to look up, should a haiku rhyme? I don't know that I've ever written a haiku.
Artistic interpretation.
So I do have a challenge for Jesse. I wrote a haiku with a question. I wonder if you could answer it with a haiku.
Okay, let's go. Bring it on.
Long days and long nights. Are you sad for it to end? What will Polis do?
He will veto bills in the coming days and weeks. Refrigerator. That's 5 syllables.
How many syllables is in a haiku again?
575.
575.
Might not be exactly that, but that was great. That was great and very informative, Jesse, on that answer. Mine's a little more innocent, but has some
innocent. Oh,
not a spicy meatball.
I should say idealistic, but has some similar themes. Heated arguments, late nights, suits and stilettos in marble-clad halls. Remember the people.
Wow. Wow, that really...
I felt that in my soul.
Yeah, we got to remember the people.
That was great. That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Jesse Paul.
I'm Benta Birkland.
And I'm Lucas Brady Woods. Our producer is Stephanie Wolf, and our editor is Megan Verlee. Sound design and engineering by Shane Rumsey. Our theme music is by Brad Turner, and huge shout out to Chaz Sisk, who was absolutely instrumental in getting this alliance off the ground. He heads back to his home in Tennessee soon and will be hugely missed.
Very missed. Purplish back in 2 weeks. We rest and sleep, please. Subscribe now, you will. I tried. Last haiku. Subscribe to Purplish now so you don't miss an episode or a haiku.
This is Purplish, From CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.